As a designer, it's seldom that I'm not usually looking for some new sources of inspiration when it comes to creating. Regardless of whether it's PC building, architecture, workspace design, or just any other mixture of things that you can think of. So when the opportunity comes that I get to learn another maker's philosophies and design methods, I like to take advantage of the opportunity to try to incorporate some of what they might know and do into my own design philosophies. So when I heard Adam Savage had made a book, it immediately caught my interest. For those of you looking for an in-depth guide on how to build things, this wouldn't be the book for you. I could see why someone might mistaken this book for being an in-depth guide on how to build things, because if you were to glance at the chapter section of the book, it has names like screw is greater than glue, use more cooling fluid, cardboard. One could be forgiven for thinking that this might be an in-depth guide, but instead, these names more or less serve as allegories for a lesson behind some of Adam's experiences throughout life. The book itself is actually a biography. That's not to say that there isn't any building or design methods included in the book. There is. There's a couple of chapters actually dedicated towards it, the biggest one I think being cardboard. But the overall feel of the book that I can get is that it's more or less a series of chronicles and lessons that Adam has learned and is talking about that he's experienced throughout his life and career. So chapter 1 starts off more or less as a call to arms in my opinion. It brings up a few different discussions like how creation might be seen as an indulgence, but my personal favorite in this chapter is the question, how do I even get started? And when you think about that, it honestly is a very big question. Because if you're a draft designer or an architect, the guiding forces that are inside your project for what you need to finish are the limitations that have been set by the client or the needs of whatever the structural designs need to be. But when you're placed in front of a blank page, the possibilities become endless, and how to even start off with an original thought becomes a much more difficult challenge. And I like the fact that this chapter points out ideas in terms of how to recognize whenever an idea comes to fruition that you just need to simply pay attention to it. And that's an invaluable asset to have, in my opinion. Chapter 3, checkboxes, comes into mind. And he doesn't add a whole lot of innovation with the exception of one thing when it comes to the checklists. And that is a half-filled checkbox, or a half-checked box, if you would. When you think about a checklist, you typically think about a linear set of things that needs to be done in order, but when you add this third element, a half-filled box, that's supposed to indicate a task that is only halfway done or substantially done, it suddenly makes a checklist much more flexible. Because when you're in kind of a design business, sometimes you might not necessarily do things in order. And when you have things that are halfway finished and you're jumping back and forth between tasks, it gives a instant identification to where all of your tasks are at in terms of progress. And even as small as an innovation as that is, it's something that is much more substantial and makes things much easier, for me at least. I personally have actually started integrating this method into my own checklists whenever I'm doing structural designs on a house project. And it honestly just adds so much more clarity, so much faster than it would be trying to go through a checklist that has just all the items scratched off, or just checked and unchecked. The only thing that I probably would say that I didn't have a preference for in these two chapters was how he broke down his lists in chapter 2. He has basic checklists, and then he breaks them down to further, more finite and detailed checklists, which I think is a good thing, but I think when it's done too far detailed that it starts to become a little unorganized and chaotic for my own taste on it. I know that some people might feel differently in terms of tackling their own projects, but when I have a variety of circumstances that need to be checked off, and it's just organized on all one sheet under various different subcategories, it just looks too chaotic for me, and it's something that I would prefer to really just have separate pages or lists dedicated towards instead. Lastly, chapter 4, Use More Cooling Fluid, goes into a lot of his personal experiences and mistakes throughout his career. He goes through a lot of lessons that he's learned throughout his time, but one of the biggest high points in this chapter is mainly learning how to accept the failures as they are and managing to take something away from them. And honestly, that's something that a lot of us have been through at some point. Regardless of whether our failures have been big or small, the lesson inside this chapter is that you should learn from them, and that's really the only silver lining that you can get from them. But even as it is a caveat, it's one of the biggest things and most valuable things that you could learn from any mistake. I would go into further details on this book, but honestly, I feel like I'd be doing it a disservice if I spoiled any more of its contents for anyone that would be considering purchasing it. It's a really great inspiration for anyone that's looking to have a fresh perspective on their own creative processes, and even if you're just curious to see another maker's perspective on creating, I would highly recommend it. It comes in audio formats as well as a hardcover format on Amazon, and those audio formats that I mentioned before, they come on Audible as well as the Google Play Store too. Though I would recommend the hardcover copy version because it has a lot more pictures of Adam's props and a lot of his sketches throughout his thought process when building certain projects. And I really just love the nitty-gritty details of the thought process behind a lot of his projects. Links for all of them down in the description below. Just as a heads up, these aren't affiliate links of any kind. I'm just trying my best to do my part in sharing this book as much as possible. If you liked my video, go ahead and leave it a like, comment, or subscribe. If you like my channel, I have a Patreon as well, but as always, I'm just happy that you're here with me today. So I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!